Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijana Vallabha Giridharadhari Gopijana Vallabha Giridharadhari Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paripadikacharya Satra Satta Srimad Esi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada founder Acharya Bhibhati ISKCON Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 12, which is entitled Creation of the Kumaras and Others. Text number 3. dṛṣṭvā pāpīyasīṁ sṛṣṭiṁ nātmānaṁ amanyata bhagavad-dhyāna-pūtena manasānyāṁ tato sṛjat dṛṣṭvā pāpīyasīṁ sṛṣṭim nātmānaṁ amanyata bhagavad-dhyāna-pūtena manasānyāṁ tato sṛjat dṛṣṭvā pāpīyasīṁ sṛṣṭim nātmānaṁ amanyata bhagavad-dhyāna-pūtena manasānyāṁ tato sṛjat. Mataji's. sṛṣṭim nātmānaṁ amanyata pūtena manasānyāṁ tato sṛjat. dṛṣṭvā, by seeing, pāpīyasīm, sinful, sṛṣṭim, creation, na did not, ātmānam unto himself, bahu much pleasure, amanyata felt, bhagavat on the personality of Godhead, dhyāna meditation, pūtena purified by that, manasā by such a mentality, anyām another, tataḥ thereafter, asṛjat created. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Seeing such a misleading creation as a sinful task, Brahmā did not feel much pleasure in his activity, and therefore he purified himself by meditation on the personality of Godhead. Then he began another term of creation. Please repeat. Seeing such a misleading creation as a sinful task, Brahmā did not feel much pleasure in his activity, and therefore he purified himself by meditation on the personality of Godhead. Then he began another term of creation. Purport. Although Lord Brahmā created the different influences of nescience, this was the previous verse from yesterday, where it said that Lord Brahmā created the nascent engagements like self-deception, the sense of death, anger after frustration, the sense of false ownership, and the illusory bodily conception of forgetfulness of one's real identity. So although he created the different influences of nescience, Lord Brahmā was not satisfied in performing such a thankless task. But he had to do it, because most of the conditioned souls wanted it to be so. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad-gītā 15:15 that He is present in everyone's heart and is helping everyone to either remember or forget. The question may be raised why the Lord, who is all-merciful, helps one to remember and another to forget. Actually, His mercy is not exhibited in particularly towards one and enmity towards another. The living entity, as part and parcel of the Lord, is partially independent because he partially possesses all the qualities of the Lord. anyone who has some independence may sometimes misuse it due to ignorance. When the living entity prefers to misuse his independence and glide down towards nations, the all-merciful Lord, first of all, tries to protect him from the trap. But when the living entity persists in gliding down to hell, the Lord helps him to forget his real position. The Lord helps the falling living entity glide down to the lowest point, just to give him the chance to see if he is happy by misusing his independence. Almost all the conditioned souls who are rotting in the material world are misusing their independence. And therefore, 5 kinds of nations are imposed upon them. As an obedient servitor of the Lord, Brahma creates all these as a matter of necessity, but he is not happy in doing so, because a devotee of the Lord naturally does not like to see anyone falling down from his real position. Persons who do not care for the path of realization get full facilities from the Lord for executing their proclivities to the fullest extent. And Brahma helps in that procedure without fail. Om Ajnanatam Brahmdasya Gyananya Svakaya Shakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Namam Vishnudaya Krishna Prasthaya Srimate Sattvarupdas Swami Tenami. Om Vishnudaya Krishna Prasthaya Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tenami. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine. So as explained in this verse and in the purport, the Lord gives the task to Lord Brahma to create the different influences of nations. Because these influences of nations, they help the people to be covered by ignorance. Although, when one is covered by ignorance, then there is also, as a result, there is also suffering. Because we are not doing the right thing. So, when you don't do the right thing, means there is suffering. So when a pure soul wants to give up the Lord's service with the aim to enjoy the material world, then Krishna gives him the chance, because he has a particular amount of independence. So he gives him the chance to enter the material world. And as soon, Srila Prabhupada makes that very clear, that as soon as we forget Krishna, and with the help of Lord Brahma, by putting us in nations, then we want to do things for our own sense gratification, naturally, automatically. And that is the service of Maya, to guide us into that, to help us into that. So as soon as we please our senses, then we are, if that's the aim, to please our senses, then we feel at home in the material world. And as soon as we give up the desire for sense gratification, and we want to do everything for Krishna's pleasure, then we are preparing ourselves for our last lifetime here. And that's called then liberation, because we are going in Krishna's direction. We can come away from Krishna or go back to Krishna. And Lord Brahma, he was tasked, he was given that task to put the living entities who are coming in the material world, to put them in illusion, so that they would feel more at home in the material world. And so that's the role, the function. He didn't like it, but it was given to him by the Lord himself, that task. So he accepted that. Because Srila Prabhupada explains that if we do whatever Krishna wants us to do, that is Bhakti Yoga. Just like we have this pastime with Jai and Vijay, the gatekeepers of Vaikuntha. When the 4 Kumaras came, these 4 small little naked boys came in front of the opulent gate of Vaikuntha, and Jai and Vijay thought, what is this? What are these small boys coming to do here? And they told them, you cannot enter. They didn't say get lost, but they kind of dealt with them like that. And then when they insisted, then they said, oh, the Lord is taking rest. You cannot see him now. So this went on for some time, but then the Kumaras became very angry, very upset, and they cursed Jai and Vijay. And when they cursed Jai and Vijay, then they understood, oh, we made a big mistake here. These are not ordinary little boys. They are powerful personalities in the form of small children. So then Jai and Vijay begged the Lord to be pardoned from this curse. But the Lord told them that he could not do that. I cannot take away, nullify the curse of my pure devotee. But, he said, you can, because you have been cursed, to take birth in the material world again. So, you can make a choice. Either you go 7 lifetimes as a devotee in a devotee family. You take 7 lifetimes birth in the material world, or you take 3 lifetimes part in the material world in my pastime. And where you will be my enemy. And I will kill you, I will personally kill you at that time. So it's your choice. So they didn't have to think long. And they choose because they didn't want to be away from the constant association of the Lord in Vaikuntha. And they, because the Lord had told them that after these 7 lives or the 3 lives are over, then you can come back to Vaikuntha Loka. So they immediately said, we want to take the 3 lifetimes because we want to be with you. And so Srila Prabhupada was making that point that a devotee can do anything which is requested by the Lord, which satisfies the Lord, and which is service by which you obey the Master. It doesn't matter what it is. As we see with Arjuna also, Arjuna didn't want to fight. But then the Lord explained to him everything. But that's Bhagavad-gītā. And then he surrendered. And he not only surrendered, but he was fighting like a lion. And in that lecture in Montreal in 1968, where Srila Prabhupada makes that point, he gives an example of the devotee's mentality in service. And the example he gave was from Govinda. Govinda was the personal servant of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he served him prasadam, and when the Lord had eaten, then he took a nap. After lunch, he took a nap. And after eating, then Govinda would always massage, when he took his nap, Lord Chaitanya took his nap, he would always massage his lotus feet. So, but he was on one side because Lord Chaitanya happened to lie down in the door opening. So the door opening was blocked. So then, in order to massage his lotus feet, he had to step over his body. And then he massaged his lotus feet. And then when Lord Chaitanya woke up after his nap, then he asked, Govinda, did you take your prasadam? And Govinda said, no, my Lord, not yet. He said, why not? Well, I didn't want to step over your body to take my prasadam. I cannot do that. But how did you get on this side in order to give me massage? He says, yes, my Lord, for service, I can step over your body. But when it's about eating, it's for my own pleasure and needs, and that I cannot do that. So that's a very nice example of a devotee's attitude, that we can do any service for the Lord. But when it comes to our own satisfaction, then we are, or a devotee is more considerate, especially in this particular case. So we can even become the enemy of the Lord, if that pleases the Lord, if that's requested by the Lord. Here in the purport, Lord Krishna refers to Bhagavad-gītā, where it says that the Lord is present in everyone's heart, and He is helping everyone to either remember Him or forget Him. And then in that purport, the question is explained why the Lord, who is all-merciful, why He helps one to remember Him and another one to forget Him. And it is explained in the purport here that the Lord's mercy is not exhibited in partiality towards one or another. The Lord is totally impartial. But we as living entities have the partial independence. We don't have full independence. We have only partial independence. Because we have partially the qualities of the Lord. So anyone who has some independence, he may sometimes misuse that independence due to ignorance, especially understanding that if when we come in the material world, we are put in these different elements of ignorance. So then naturally the chances to misuse our independence are in the material world even bigger. So when the living entity prefers to misuse its independence and glides down to ignorance, then the first thing that the Lord does, He tries to convince the devotee to not go in that direction. He tries to convince the devotee to reconsider what is the direction he is going. And it's only after he has tried, just like he tried so many times to convince Duryodhana from attacking the Pandavas, but to no avail. So after he has tried to convince the living entity from gliding down from his spiritual position to the material world, then the Lord surrenders to the independent will of the living entity, and then He helps the living entity go down and down and down. And why down and down and down? Because the Lord is hoping that by going down, the living entity will then come to his senses and will then understand that the misuse of his independence was actually a mistake. Our relationship with the Lord is a relationship of love. Bhakti. Bhakti is love. So, love cannot be forced. Otherwise, it's not love. It's like slavery, forced. So that the Lord wants to keep that relationship where the living entity takes that decision himself to love the Lord. So therefore, if the living entity is determined, although the Lord is trying to explain to him that this is the wrong direction, then still the Lord let it happen, and the Lord even assists through his entities, through Lord Brahma, to his servants. He assists in allowing that us conditioned souls to face the hard reality of the material world. Desires is something we have to be careful with, because if we cultivate desires and we don't counteract them with prayers that the Lord may not fulfill our desire, then we can one day realize, oh my God, I was too much meditating on some material desires, and now they are actually being fulfilled. Because the Lord is the fulfiller of all desires. The right desires and the wrong desires are getting fulfilled. Of course, the Lord always wants to correct the living entity, but if the living entity is determined in his conditioned desires, then the Lord will ultimately fulfill these desires. So we as devotees have to be very careful on what we meditate, because we all have, since we are not pure-hearted, so naturally unclean thoughts come in our mind. But then it's a question, what do we do with these undesirable desires? Are we pondering on them more and more and more until it's very hard to pull back? Or are we dealing with it and praying to the Lord to not fulfill the desires that come up in our heart? So Srila Prabhupada is saying the purport, almost all the conditioned souls who are rotting in the material world, they are misusing their independence, and therefore these 5 kinds of nations are imposed upon them. As an obedient servitor of the Lord, Brahmā creates all these as a matter of necessity. But he is not happy in doing so, because the devotee of the Lord naturally does not like to see anyone falling down from his real position. So Lord Brahma is not happy doing what he has to do, because a pure devotee is compassionate at heart, and when he sees somebody getting more and more entangled in the material world, suffering in the material world, it does not give pleasure. Like Srila Prabhupada was not happy to see how much suffering there is in the world. And that's why he went out of his way to counteract that suffering and to wake up the conditioned souls and to help them get out of this entanglement. So that's natural. So it's natural that Lord Brahma was not happy. But he did it as his service to Lord Krishna. He did it and he surrendered to it. And then of course later on it says that he meditates and then he continues with the creation in the following verses. So, so in that sense, you know, it's a hard reality that the misuse of our freedom is problematic. There is an introduction of chapter 14 of Canto 5 that describes quite well the situation of the living entity. That chapter is called The Material World as the Great Forest of Enjoyment. And Srila Prabhupada writes in that summary of that chapter, when the pure soul wants to give up the Lord's service to enjoy the material world, Krishna certainly gives him a chance to enter the material world. As stated in the Prema Vivarta, Krishna Bahir Mukha Hana Bhoga Vanchakare. This is the reason the pure spirit soul falls down to the material world. Due to his activities under the influence of the three modes of material nature, the living entity takes different positions in different species. Sometimes he is a demigod in the heavenly planets, and sometimes a most insignificant creature in the lower planetary systems. In this regard, Sri Narottama Das Thakur says, Nana Yoni Sada Pire, the living entity passes through various species. Kardarya Bhakshanakare, he is obliged to eat and enjoy abominable things. Tara Janmada Pateya Yaya. In this way, his whole life is spoiled. Without the protection of an all-merciful Vaishnava, the conditioned soul cannot get out of the clutches of Maya. As stated in Bhagavad-gītā, the living entity begins material life with his mind and the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. And with these, he struggles for existence within the material world. These senses are compared to rogues and thieves within the forest. They take away a man's knowledge and place him in a network of nescience. Thus, the senses are like rogues and thieves that plunder his spiritual knowledge. Over and above this, there are family members, wife and children, who are like the animals in the forest. The business of such animals is to eat a man's flesh. The living entity allows himself to be attacked by jackals and foxes, and thus his real spiritual life is finished. In the forest of material life, everyone is envious, like mosquitoes and rats and mice are always creating disturbances. Everyone in this material world is placed in many awkward positions and surrounded by envious people and disturbing animals. The result is that a living entity in the material world is always plundered and bitten by many living entities. Nonetheless, despite these disturbances, he does not want to give up his family life, and he continues his fruitive activities in an attempt to become happy in the future. He thus becomes more and more entangled in the results of karma, and thus he is forced to act impiously. His witnesses are the sun during the day and the moon during the night. The demigods also witness, but the conditioned soul thinks that his attempts at sense gratification are not being witnessed by anyone. Sometimes, when he is detected, he temporarily renounces everything. But due to his great attachment for the body, his renunciation is given up before he can attain perfection. So the entanglement in the material world is very strong. It's like shackles. Even if we try to get out of it, we get pulled back on it. Of course, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada, we have been given a way out of this material world. But in general, for the people in general, the attachments are very, very strong. For devotees also the attachments are strong, but we have been given away a process by which, if we follow it, we can undo the shackles of the material world, and we can purify our heart, and we can re-establish our relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead through unalloyed devotional service, which is a very high level of devotional service. Bhakti is not cheap. One has to work hard to, and one, as Srila Prabhupada says, has to be seriously and sincere in the process of Krishna consciousness in order to purify these attachments, these anchorings, these shackles which bind us to the material world. So I will stop here. Any comments, questions? Welcome. Yes.
Thank you for that analysis of the miseries of being in the material world. Hare Krishna. So, in my experience as preaching to people, I find that the miseries, like when you were reading in the forest, living entities are always attacking, biting, eating us, trampling us. So in my experience, when people see all these miseries, they, due to nations, they become atheistic even more. They can't believe that there is a loving God if there's all these miseries. And how would you respond to such a person? When I was a young boy, my priest, rabbi, told me in confidence, I was about 12 years old, he said, I don't actually believe in God. He's the head of a religious temple, and he said that to me. He said, when I think of the Holocaust and what Nazis did to all kinds of people, I can't believe a God would allow that. So how can we help someone like that to believe in God again?
Yeah, I mean it's a fact that many people, even who have been had a religious upbringing, so to say, like the Catholics, for example, generations ago was very strongly present. Now it's dwindling down, but still, many people have been educated as Catholics. But then when something happens, like, I know one family member, her daughter had cancer when she was brain cancer when her daughter was 32, my older sister's daughter, and so that broke her faith, because she thinks how, you know, she was always believing in God, but she said, how can this now happen to my daughter, you know? I live as pious as I can. For them means once a week go to the mass and few small other things. So it is, you know, it is not a simple thing. We have to give them the knowledge of Krishna consciousness, and that's why this book distribution is so important, because even if we try to convince them, like I did some effort in that regard, even if we try to convince them, then still it's very hard. First of all, it's not easy to accept things from a family member. Then it's not easy also because I'm younger than her, etc. So these things make it very difficult. But if we can, through book distribution, through getting in contact with Srila Prabhupada's realizations, that can change the people. It has to be done by knowledge, by understanding, and by there has to be some readiness from that person also. Person has to be a little bit ready, has to be a little bit frustrated with the material energy. Because if people are in full drive and getting big salaries, driving big car, big CEO position in a company, etc., it's very hard to preach to these people, because they have some or other found a way with great efforts and some of the good karma that he still had. He has been successful in the material life. And then it's very difficult for people who are successful in the and who are driving on that energy. It's very difficult to. It's much more easy to preach to people who have understood a little bit that the material world is not such a pleasurable place. It's actually a painful place, and who have hit their head a few times against the wall. It's much more easy to preach and make people understand in that category than. So I don't know if that answers your question.
In part it does. But I found that if a person can be convinced that there's a soul, if they think about that and you say to them, the soul never dies. The whole mistake in the Western world is that, okay, the soul never dies, but where does it go? Goes to hell forever? And they think that, how can a loving God send his son or daughter to hell forever? So the whole concept in the Western world, what they're missing is that there's many lives, not just one life. And Prabhupada said, if you can just get them to understand that, then they can begin to understand the nature of the material world. So I would just add that.
Yeah. Nice point, because it's indeed a Christian understanding that to hell forever. So that's a very very weird concept, and is completely misunderstood if we understand Krishna consciousness. Thank you very much. So Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Radha Madhava ki